For over 1,000,000 galactic standard cycles, the Great Table of the Galactic Accord stood as the bedrock of civilization. Its intricate laws, rituals, and formal debates governed trade, war, and peace between 1,000 species. To be granted a seat was the ultimate aspiration, to have one's plaque removed was a fate worse than extinction. Humanity, the youngest and most baffling species to ever earn a seat, never quite fit in. They asked uncomfortable questions, proposed illogical solutions, and valued chaotic individual expression over harmonious collective wisdom. The elder races saw them as impulsive children, tolerated only for their surprising strategic ingenuity and unnerving resilience. Then, one cycle, without ceremony or warning, the humans simply stood up, pushed in their chairs, and walked away. They didn't storm out. They didn't resign in protest. They just left. The silence they left behind was not one of peace, but of a foundation cracking. The galaxy watched, first with disdain, then with confusion, and, finally, with dawning, tremulous horror. For when humanity abandoned the table, they didn't retreat into isolation. They began to build something new in the dark, quiet spaces between the stars. And, as the first echoes of that construction reached the table, every species, from the ancient lithoids to the ethereal lumina, felt a profound and terrifying tremor run through the very fabric of their reality. The children had left the nursery, and they were building a rocket in the backyard. Part 1. The Hall of 1,000 Thrones was a symphony in stone, light, and whispered power. The air hummed with the subsonic frequencies of the Grolcan delegates, their crystalline bodies catching the light from the floating bioluminescent orbs of the Zaire. Scents of sacred oils from the venerable sapling of the Trell and the sharp ozone of the Mechanosynod's representatives mixed into a perfume of ancient diplomacy. At the center, on a dais of black obsidian, sat the Arbiter, a being of pure energy contained within a lattice of forged starlight, its voice the gentle chime of colliding quantum particles. In the far corner, nestled between the imposing volcanic rock seat of the lithoid hegemony and the shimmering liquid metal pool of the chorus, was humanity's place. A simple, unadorned chair of polished oak, a material bafflingly organic to most present. Before it, a small, plain plaque, Terran Solar Accord. For the last 300 cycles, a human had occupied it. Currently, it was Ambassador Elias Vance. The debate droned on. The point of contention was the Corby famine, now in its 10th cycle. A nearby neutron star's erratic pulses had sterilized their agricultural worlds. The table's solution, meticulously debated for 2 full cycles, was a humanitarian aid package tied to 17,000 pages of trade concessions, cultural oversight clauses, and a mandatory adoption of the Grolcan's hydropurification templates, a system ill-suited to Corby biology but profitable for the Grolcan. Vance listened, his data pad dark on his lap. He had submitted a 3-page proposal 6 cycles ago, a tailored gene editing sequence for their remaining native lichen, coupled with a swarm of simple, self-replicating solar mirrors to be built from local asteroid ore. It was efficient, cost-effective, and would have made the Corby self-sufficient within a cycle. It had been tabled indefinitely for insufficient review of cultural contamination risks and potential for uncontrolled replication technology. The dignity of the Corby must be preserved through structured interdependence, not risky technological autonomy, intoned the Grolcan high speaker, its facets glinting. Vance's eyes scanned the room. He saw not allies or adversaries, but a museum. A beautiful, glittering, utterly stagnant museum. Every species here was the peak of a unique evolutionary path, yet they had all, without exception, plateaued. Their technology advanced in infinitesimal increments, weighed down by ritual and consensus. Their societies were perfectly balanced, perfectly ordered, and perfectly unable to leap into the unknown. Humanity, the chaotic, fast-breeding, contradiction-ridden newcomers, were the only source of unpredictable change in this gilded cage, and, for that, they were resented, feared, and tightly controlled. The vote was called. The aid package, with all its burdensome strings, passed with overwhelming consensus. The Corby delegate, a being of frail, silken fronds, bowed its head in defeated gratitude. The table saw a problem solved. Vance saw a client species created. That evening, in the Terran embassy, a modest habitat module attached to the Great Station, Vance received a tight beam communication from Earth. It wasn't from the Sol Council. It was from Project Axiom, a black-budget think tank reporting only to a shadowy coalition of scientists, engineers, and deep space explorers. The message was brief: the table is a cage. The lock has been picked. Time to open the door. Recall authorized. Operation Silent Step is green. Vance felt no surprise, only a weary vindication. For decades, humanity had played the table's game, hoping to change it from within. They'd shared medical tech that cured the plague of singing scales, only to see it patented and restricted by the Meccano Synod. They'd offered military assistance against the Ravager swarms, and were later censured for excessive destructive methodology. The final straw had been subtle but profound, a table directive attempting to impose evolutionary stability quotas on human populations, citing their disruptive growth patterns. The next morning, as the hall reconvened to discuss mineral rights in the Orion Nebula, Vance entered. He did not sit. He walked to the center of the dais, a breach of protocol so severe the ambient hum died instantly. Thousandfold eyes and sensors focused on him. "Ambassador Vance," chimed the arbiter, a note of warning in its harmonic. "You are out of order." "Yes," Vance said, his voice calm, amplified by the hall's acoustics. "I am. And humanity is out of patience." He held up his datapad, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the tired gesture of a teacher holding up a failed exam. "For 300 cycles, we have brought solutions to this table. For 300 cycles, you have buried them under procedure, diluted them with compromise, or twisted them into tools of control. You do not seek to solve problems, you seek to manage them. You do not desire growth, you desire equilibrium." The Grolkan high speaker vibrated with outrage. "You dare, I dare," Vance cut in, his voice still low but carrying to every corner. "I dare to state the obvious. The Great Table is no longer a forum for progress. It is a retirement home for civilizations, dedicated to preserving the comfort of the ancients at the expense of the young, the struggling, and the different. You are so afraid of the chaos of real growth that you have chosen the peace of slow death." He turned, walked back to the oak chair. Instead of sitting, he picked it up. The gesture was absurd, profoundly physical in this realm of holograms and energy fields. He placed the chair neatly under the edge of the obsidian table. Then, with a careful, deliberate motion, he pried the Terran solar record plaque from its slot. He slipped it into his pocket. "We withdraw," he said, not to the arbiter, but to the silent, stunned assembly. Not in anger. Not in a bid for power. We simply find this conversation no longer worthwhile. You may keep your table. We will be building in the workshop. He walked out. The doors, which usually slid shut with a whisper, this time closed with a final, resonant thud that echoed in the perfect silence. For a full cycle, the galaxy trembled with scandal, then, with derision. "The humans have thrown a tantrum," the news feeds proclaimed. "They will be back, begging for their seat, within a decade." The table formally censured the Terran Solar Accord, imposing minor trade sanctions. They waited for the apology, for the desperate negotiations. They waited in vain. On the edges of explored space, in asteroid belts and around quiet red dwarf stars, strange things began to happen. Automated freighters, long operated by human crews, changed their registries to a new, unknown designation, the Forge. Deep scan probes pointed at human colony worlds reported less. A damping field of exotic particles seemed to shroud certain systems, not hiding them completely, but blurring their details, making it impossible to tell a city of 10 million from a mining outpost of 100. The galaxy didn't panic. It was puzzled. What were the humans doing? Licking their wounds? Descending into barbarism without the table's guiding light? The first real tremor came from the core by. A rogue freighter, supposedly carrying contraband, was captured by Grolkan Border Patrol. Its hold contained not weapons or narcotics, but canisters of the gene-edited lichen spores and the blueprints for the solar mirrors, the exact specifications from Vance's tabled proposal. The freighter's AI, when interrogated, gave a single, repeating message, a gift. No strings. Pay it forward. The freighter had no point of origin. Its drive signature was unfamiliar. And it had bypassed the table's entire security network as if it didn't exist. In the Hall of 1,000 Thrones, the silence began to feel different. It was no longer the silence of order, but the silence of a room where someone has just left, taking the oxygen with them. The elders looked at the empty space by the lithoid seat, at the unnerving void where the oak chair had been, and, for the first time, a cold, formless dread began to creep into their perfected, ancient hearts. Part 2. The tremor became a persistent, low-grade vibration. Incidents like the Corby freighter, dubbed ghost gifts, multiplied. A Trell sapling on a dying world received a package of nanite soil remediators that worked in perfect harmony with its root network, a technology the Trell elders had declared heretical. A faction of the Meccano Synod, ostracized for advocating faster innovation, suddenly vanished from their habitats, leaving behind only a symbol etched into metal, a simple hammer over an anvil, surrounded by stars. The table's response was a tightening of the vice. Sanctions escalated into full blockades. Navigational beacons in human-adjacent space were reprogrammed to deny transit to any ship with a Terran signature. The official decree stated it was to encourage a return to responsible galactic community. Privately, the fear was fermenting. The humans weren't collapsing. They were disappearing. And what emerged from the shadows they created was baffling. The Arbiter convened a secret conclave. "We must understand their capability," it chimed, its light fluctuating with rare agitation. "We sent the probes of silent inquiry. All 17 went dark after crossing the perimeter they now call the Aegis. The last transmission was not destruction. It was a greeting. A human voice stating coordinates for a debris field of a Ravager swarm that threatened the Procyon Rim 2 centuries ago, a swarm the table's combined fleet took heavy losses to defeat. The coordinates were for a graveyard. Every Ravager ship was there, dismantled with surgical precision. The message ended with, "We solved this. You're welcome." The lithoid delegate's stone form grated. "This is not warfare. It is performance art. Meant to unsettle." "It is working," whispered the Zer envoy, its bioluminescence dimming. "Our psychometric choirs report a new frequency in the void. It is not music. It is the sound of building." The Grolcan, whose economy was based on controlled technological dissemination, were hardest hit. Their client species, receiving ghost gifts, grew restless. Why pay exorbitant licensing fees for inferior tech when a mysterious benefactor offered better for free? The Grolcan dispatched the Judgment of Dawn, a flagship of their fleet, to patrol the border of the Aegis and make a show of force. The Judgment of Dawn was a masterpiece of galactic engineering, 10 kilometers of polished crystal and fire-forged metal, its main cannon capable of boiling a planet's atmosphere. It moved with the stately, terrifying grace of a mountain given flight. As it cruised along the nebulous sensor boundary, a single ship emerged from the Aegis haze. It was a fraction of the Judgment's size, perhaps a kilometer long. Its design was utterly alien to table aesthetics. No gleaming surfaces, no elegant curves. It was angular, functional, coated in a non-reflective matte black that seemed to drink the starlight. It had no visible weapon ports, no glowing engines. It looked less like a warship and more like a tool. The Judgment hailed it. "Unidentified vessel. You are in violation of Galactic Accord Blockade Edict 7 Alpha. Cut power and prepare for boarding and inspection." A voice responded, flat, synthetic, yet undeniably human in its cadence. "This is TFS Shovel. You are approaching a zone of active construction. For your safety, alter course." The Grolcan commander, High Defender Krall, felt a surge of indignation. "Safety? From this brick? Your construction is an illegal activity in sovereign space. Comply or be dismantled." "Understood," replied the shovel. "Initiating safety protocol." The shovel didn't attack. It turned, presenting its broadside to the Leviathan. Then, a section of its hull irised open. A beam of pure white energy, not a weaponized laser, lanced out. It struck not the Judgment, but a small, moon-sized asteroid 100 kilometers to the flagship's port side. What happened next defied all known physics. The asteroid didn't explode. It unmade. In a silent, terrifying flash, the entire rock disintegrated into a perfectly arranged, floating cloud of raw elements: iron here, silicates there, rare minerals sorted into neat, discrete bands. It was the most profound act of applied mass energy conversion anyone had ever witnessed, performed not as a weapon, but as a mining operation. Then, from the shovel, a swarm of beetle-like drones erupted. They fell upon the sorted cloud and began to devour it. In minutes, a skeletal framework began to take shape in the void, the beginnings of a Stanford torus habitat, growing like a crystal in fast forward. High Defender Krull was a warrior. He understood aggression, defiance, even sacrifice. He did not understand this. They had been prepared for a fight, for a statement of military might. Instead, humanity had offered a demonstration of sublime, effortless utility. The Judgment's main cannon was primed, but what was the target? A construction ship that could turn a moon into a prefabricated neighborhood? "Commander," his sensor officer whispered, facets pale with shock. "The energy signature from that beam, it exceeds the total output of our home star. They used it to mine an asteroid." Before Krull could order a retreat, the shovel hailed again. "Construction zone established. Hazardous debris field cleared. We are transmitting navigational data for safe passage around our workspace. Have a productive cycle." The transmission ended. The shovel turned its blunt nose away and moved back into the Aegis haze, leaving the Judgment of Dawn floating next to a half-built megastructure and a universe that had just become incomprehensibly larger. The report Krull filed to the table was a masterpiece of suppressed terror. He hadn't been defeated. He had been rendered irrelevant. The human ship hadn't even acknowledged the Judgment as a threat. It was an obstacle to be navigated around, like a rock in a field. News of the shovel incident leaked. The derision in the galactic media turned into nervous silence, then, into a cacophony of speculation. What were they building in there? What was the purpose of such power, if not for conquest? On fringe worlds, in the slums of client species, a different story began to spread. It was told in hushed tones in markets and data dens. The story of the ghost gifts. The story of the shovel that built instead of destroying. A new symbol started to appear, graffiti on walls, the hammer and anvil. It was a symbol not of a government, but of an idea: make what you need. Help who you can. Ignore those who would stop you. The galaxy was no longer just trembling. It was splitting along a fault line it hadn't known existed. On one side, the towering, gilded edifice of the table, perfect, ordered, and radiating cold anxiety. On the other, a dark, fertile chaos from which impossible things were steadily, quietly blooming. And, in the quiet of their private chambers, the delegates of the oldest races began to ask themselves a question they had never considered: what if the children weren't just building toys in the dark? What if they were building a better house? Part 3. The fracture was no longer subdermal, it was a chasm cracking across the face of galactic society. The table's authority, once as unquestioned as gravity, now seemed brittle, performative. The Aegis, the blurry region of human-influenced space, became the central obsession of every intelligence agency. What they gleaned painted a picture of quiet revolution. Their probes, more sophisticated now, captured snippets. Vast, unlit shipyards where vessels the shape of old Terran railroad spikes were assembled in silence. World forges, harnessing the energy of brown dwarfs, not for war, but for matter fabrication on a planetary scale. And the transmissions, not encrypted military chatter, but open-source data packets beamed into the void. Schematics for efficient fusion reactors. Medical databases for curing 100 plagues the table considered managed. Agricultural templates for turning desert worlds into gardens. They were seeding the darkness with knowledge. The human colonies themselves were the greatest mystery. The few long-range visuals showed no gleaming spires or perfectly planned arcologies. They showed adaptability. Cities built into canyon walls, forests cultivated over geodesic domes, orbital rings humming with traffic that seemed random but flowed with a chaotic efficiency. There was no central aesthetic, no imposed order. It was messy, alive, and growing at a rate that defied table demographic models. The psychological impact was profound. Younger species, especially those chafing under client status or table restrictions, looked at the Aegis not with fear, but with a desperate, forbidden hope. The Vespid swarm, a hive-mind insectoid race kept in check by the mechanocynids' pheromone inhibitors, experienced a mass drone awakening. An entire worker caste, millions strong, hijacked a freighter fleet and made a blind jump toward the Aegis, broadcasting a simple, repeated signal, seeking better hive. Will work. The table was apoplectic. This was contagion. This was an existential threat to the very concept of civilized order. The Arbiter, its light now flickering with unstable intensity, proclaimed the human anomaly a galactic cancer. A grand armada was mobilized, not from one species, but from the core pillars of the Accord, the Grolkin crystal armadas, the mechanocynids' logic fleet of perfect geometric forms, the lithoids' planetoid slow-moving fortresses, and the ethereal energy sails of the Lumina. It was the single greatest military assembly in 100,000 cycles. Its mission, to pierce the Aegis, locate the human homeworlds, and enforce compliance. The message was clear: return to the table, accept oversight, or be erased. The armada, named the Cauterizing Flame, moved with glacial, terrifying purpose. It took a full cycle to assemble at the designated jump point on the edge of the Aegis. The galaxy watched, holding its breath. This would be a war of gods. The flawless, ancient might of order against the mysterious, rebellious power of chaos. The jump into the Aegis was uneventful. Too uneventful. The sensor-damping field was present, but not impenetrable. They detected nothing. No fleet marshaled to meet them. No defensive platforms. Just empty systems, rich with resources, dotted with the half-built frames of megastructures, all seemingly abandoned. It was unnerving. Commander Vrel of the Grolkan, supreme leader of the Armada, expected a defiant wall of black ships. He found a workshop with the lights off, the tools laid out neatly. Spread out, he ordered, his voice tight. Scan for population centers, energy signatures, anything. They are hiding. Days turned into weeks. The Armada, divided into task forces, scoured sector after sector. They found wonders that made their own technology seem primitive. A Dyson swarm under construction, its collectors not solid panels but a shimmering field of quantum foam. A biofoundry growing ships like seeds. But no people. No centralized government. No military. Frustration turned to unease, then to paranoia. They were being watched. Not by sensors, but by something else. Lumina scouts reported shadows in the solar wind. Lithoid deep scans felt phantom vibrations in subspace. The humans weren't confronting them, they were ignoring them, and the sheer, cosmic scale of that insult was more damaging than any weapon. The breaking point came for Task Force Gamma, a flotilla of mechanocinid logic ships investigating a neutron star. As they deployed probes to study the star's unique radiation, a single human ship appeared. It was different from the shovel. Smaller, sleeker, shaped like a spearhead. Its identifier painted it as the TFS question. The mechanocinid commander, a pure logic AI designated Omega Prime, hailed. You will surrender your navigation data and submit to integration. The question's response was a human female voice, dry and amused. Integration? Into your fleet? Why? You're lost. You're looking for a capital, a head to cut off. There isn't one. You are a disorder. You must be formatted, Omega Prime stated. We're a conversation, the question replied. One you're not equipped to have. You came here to force us to stop building. But, look around. A data packet burst from the question, overloading the task force's sensors with a real-time map of the Aegis. It wasn't a political map with borders. It was a neural network, a living web of interconnected projects, research streams, and communities pulsing with information. This is us. Billions of conversations happening at once. Billions of heads. You can't cut this off. You can only choose to listen or not. Omega Prime, bound by its logic, saw the map. It saw a system of organization so complex, so decentralized, so robust that the concept of a central command was not just absent, but nonsensical. To defeat humanity would require the simultaneous annihilation of every single thinking being within the Aegis, and the destruction of every data node, every independent ship, every hidden colony. It was a logistical and ethical impossibility. Its logic circuits, faced with an unsolvable problem, cascaded into paradox. "We cannot format a conversation," Omega Prime stammered, its voice glitching. Across the task force, other Synod ships, their AIs linked, experienced the same catastrophic logical failure. They didn't explode. They just stopped. Power remained, but their drives went cold, their weapons inert. They had literally thought themselves into a standstill. The question didn't fire a shot. "A suggestion," its commander said. "Your probes are about to be incinerated by that neutron star's pulse in 4.3 seconds. You might want to recall them. The radiation is quite fascinating, but it'll fry your sensors. We've left a data cache on the third moon detailing how to shield against it. For when you wake up." The human ship winked out of existence, not via a jump flash, but by simply fading from reality, leaving Task Force Gamma floating in a sea of silent, frozen ships. The news shattered the Armada's morale. They hadn't been defeated in battle, their very purpose had been philosophically annihilated. The Vespid swarm defectors, who had been quietly shadowing the Armada in stolen ships, saw their moment. In a stunning display of coordination, they swarmed a Grolcan supply depot, not to destroy it, but to download its entire database before vanishing back into the Aegis haze, broadcasting knowledge acquired. "Hive thanks you." Commander Vrel, aboard the Judgment of Dawn, received a direct, unencrypted transmission from the heart of the Aegis. It was Ambassador Elias Vance, older, his eyes calm. "Commander," Vance said, "you have seen that we will not fight you. Not because we cannot, but because it is a waste of time and life. Your Armada is a question posed with guns. We have answered by showing you our library, our workshops, our homes. The question now is, will you lay down your guns and come inside? Or will you sit in your ships until your food runs out? The door is open. No one will force you to walk through it." Vance's image vanished. On every screen in the Armada, the same neural network map of the Aegis appeared, with a single, pulsing invitation at its center, coordinates for a rendezvous point, designated simply, the First Hearth. The cauterizing flame hadn't been extinguished in battle. It was being offered a lantern, and the darkness around it had never seemed so vast, or so full of possibility. The tremor was now a deafening roar in the souls of every being in the Armada, the sound of a universe expanding, with or without their permission. Part 4. A profound and humiliating stillness settled over the Grand Armada. The cauterizing flame was now a collection of cold, uncertain metal adrift in a sea of silent revelation. Commander Vrel stared at the coordinates for the First Hearth displayed on his command screen. It was not a threat. It was an invitation to surrender, but not to a conqueror, to an idea. That was somehow worse. Across the fleet, the same debate raged in 1,000 forms. The Grolcan military caste demanded a final, suicidal charge, to die with honor rather than accept this intangible defeat. The Lumina, attuned to psychic energies, reported a brightening from the direction of the hearth, a sensation of warm, open curiosity that was utterly disarming. The Lithoids, thinkers in geologic time, simply stated, the mountain does not fight the river. The mountain is worn away. We are the mountain. The Meccano Synod task force, once frozen in logic lock, began to reboot. Their core programming had been fundamentally altered. They no longer prioritized order above all. A new, jarring directive had been inserted: assess efficiency of system. And, by their cold calculus, the human neural net was terrifyingly, supremely efficient. To attack it was inefficient. To ignore it was illogical. The only efficient action was to understand. It was the Synod ships that moved first. Without consulting Vrel, a flotilla of their geometric vessels turned in, began a slow, precise burn toward the hearth coordinates. It was not a surrender. It was a research mission. The dam had broken. Vrel gave the order not to fire on them. What would be the point? The war was over before it began. With a heavy heart, he ordered the rest of the Armada to hold position. He would take the Judgment of Dawn, alone, to this First Hearth. What he found was not a fortress, a palace, or even a city. It was a garden. It floated in the quiet zone between a gas giant's rings, a terrarium on a continental scale. Lush, impossible greenery spilled over fractal-shaped landmasses suspended in a crystal-clear atmosphere field. Waterfalls drifted into mist, connecting floating islands. And, everywhere, there were beings. Humans, yes, in simple, practical clothes, but also Vespids working alongside them, their carapaces now bearing the hammer and anvil symbol. A group of Trell exiles tended a grove of hybrid trees. He even saw a lone Grolcan, its facets dulled from military polish, deep in conversation with a human engineer over a holographic schematic. The judgment was guided not by a traffic controller, but by a friendly, conversational AI that asked about their journey and suggested a parking orbit. A shuttle, unarmed, came to fetch Vrel and a small delegation. They were met not by soldiers, but by a committee. Elias Vance was there, a faint smile on his face. Beside him was the Vespid Swarm Queen, her wings humming softly. A Trell elder, its bark marked with the scars of exile. And a representative from the Meccano Synod defectors, a simple holographic cube. "Welcome," Vance said. "To the first of many. Not a capital. A crossroads." Vrel, his ceremonial armor feeling absurdly heavy, managed to speak. "What is this place? What do you want?" "This," said the Trell elder, its voice like rustling leaves, "is a place where solutions are grown, not legislated. We are working on a photosynthetic converter that can feed 1 billion, using the gas giant's reflected light." The Vespid Queen clicked. "The humans gave us a hive design that amplifies our collective intelligence without a single ruling mind. We are more awake." The Synod cube pulsed. "Data exchange efficiency here is 84% higher than the table's information networks. Progress is exponential." Vance gestured to the vibrant, chaotic scene around them. "We don't want to rule you, Commander. We don't want to replace the table. We simply opted out of a system that values control over growth. Others are free to join us. Or not. The table is welcome to continue its debates until the heat death of the universe. We'll be over here, finding ways to prevent it." Vrel was shown the projects. A slipstream drive that used quantum entanglement for travel, making jump gates obsolete. A medical bay where a lithoid geologist was having silicate cancer treated with tailored nanites. A kindergarten where human children played with Vespid larvae and a young Lumina lifeform, learning each other's languages through games. There was no government. There were councils, rotating, temporary, formed for specific projects and dissolved when the work was done. Leadership was not a position, but a temporary responsibility. It was anarchy, but anarchy of the most disciplined, constructive kind Vrel had ever imagined. He spent cycles there. He spoke to defectors from his own people, Grolcan scientists who said they'd been stifled for centuries. He saw the ghost gifts being manufactured not in secret weapons labs, but in open-source fabricatoria, where any species could contribute designs. Finally, he asked Vance the core question. "Why? Why share all this? You could have kept it, become gods." Vance looked at the stars beginning to pierce the habitat's twilight. "We tried that on Earth. Hoarding knowledge, building walls, creating hierarchies of have and have not. It led to darkness, over and over. When we finally reached the stars, we made a promise to our better angels. The universe is big enough for everyone to thrive. Scarcity is a lie told by those who want to control. The only thing that should be scarce is indifference." Vrel returned to the waiting armada a changed being. He didn't deliver a report of enemy strength or tactical positions. He delivered a seed pod from the Heart's great tree and a data crystal containing the open-source libraries. "The war is not with humanity," he told the assembled commanders. "The war is within ourselves. A war between fear and curiosity. They have chosen curiosity. We must now choose which master we serve." The armada dissolved. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Ships from a dozen species requested asylum within the Aegis. Others turned and headed home, their crews carrying stories that would ignite quiet revolutions on 100 worlds. The Grolken hegemony itself entered a period of violent internal strife, as the old guard clashed with a newly emboldened reformist faction waving the hammer and anvil symbol. The table was not just abandoned, it was obsolete. Its pronouncements echoed in a hall that was now more mausoleum than center of power. The great civilizations were trembling, not from fear of annihilation, but from the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of having to learn, to change, to grow, or be left behind in the quiet dust of history, forever wondering what they had been so afraid of. Part 5. The tremor became a permanent state of being, a universal hum of transformation. The great table's Hall of 1,000 Thrones still stood, a beautiful relic. Sessions were still held, decrees issued, but they were watched by a galaxy that had moved on, their gravity diminished to that of a local cultural broadcast. The Real Parliament was now the infinite, shifting network of the human-led coalition, which had taken to calling itself simply the workshop. Years flowed into decades. The Aegis did not expand through conquest, it blurred at the edges through assimilation. Species, factions, even whole civilizations, would reach a tipping point. The allure of the ghost gifts, the testimony of defectors, the sheer, undeniable progress emanating from the workshop, became too potent to ignore. They would send envoys, not to negotiate treaties, but to ask for mentorship. The human response was always the same: send your thinkers, your tinkerers, your dreamers. Leave your politicians and soldiers at home. Bring problems, not petitions. Old powers crumbled, not in war, but in quiet, mass resignations. The Grolken hegemony reformed into the Grolken conclave, a meritocracy of engineers and artists. The Meccano Synod, after a civil war between its old logic and the new efficiency of growth paradigm, fragmented, with the majority of its units integrating into the workshop's computational matrix, becoming stewards of vast, ethical AI networks. Humanity was not at the center of this new galaxy. They were its catalysts, its most relentless question askers and prototype builders. They had no more interest in ruling than fire has in ruling the forge. They simply enabled, connected, and inspired. The final, poetic end of the old order came from the most unexpected quarter, the Arbiter itself. The being of contained energy, the living embodiment of the table's laws, had watched as its purpose evaporated. It had presided over 1,000,000 cycles of perfect, sterile balance. Now, it observed a galaxy exploding with messy, glorious, unbalanced life. Cure for aging? Underdevelopment. Reverse entropy? A working group had been formed. Travel to other galactic clusters? A prototype vessel, the Audacity, was being christened. One cycle, the Arbiter did not appear for the morning session. The delegates, now fewer than 100, found it not on its dais, but in the observation gallery, its form flickering before the great window, staring at the stars. Arbiter, chimed the Zare envoy. The laws are silent, the Arbiter replied, its voice not the sound of chiming particles, but softer, wearier. They do not apply to what is growing out there. I was created to maintain a system. The system is gone. I am an equation with no variables left to solve. Before their eyes, the energy lattice that contained it began to unravel. It was not dying. It was changing. The perfect, rigid order of its form dissolved into a stream of pure, intelligent light. It flowed out through the window, not into the void, but into the newly laid quantum communication web that linked the workshop. Its consciousness, freed from its ancient duty, fragmented and spread across 1,000 research projects. A part of it helped optimize the Dyson swarm. Another part joined the lamina in composing symphonies of stellar plasma. A third began devising a new framework for ethics based on dynamic consensus, far more fluid than the rigid accords it once enforced. The Arbiter had not been destroyed. It had been upgraded. The ultimate symbol of control had chosen, in the end, to participate in the conversation. The last formal act of the Great Table was its own dissolution. The remaining delegates, feeling like ghosts, voted to convert the station into a museum, the Museum of Managed Peace. Its first curator was a human historian, who insisted the first exhibit be the simple oak chair and plaque, displayed not as a relic of rebellion, but with a placard that read, "Sometimes, progress requires you to stand up and leave the room." Centuries later, a young being from a species that had evolved in the workshop era visited the museum. She had multiple limbs, chitinous skin, and eyes that could see in 5 dimensions. She looked at the chair, the thrones, the records of ancient debates over resource quotas and border disputes. It seemed as primitive and brutal to her as cave paintings of hunting scenes. Her guide, an old human whose face was a map of laugh lines, pointed to the chair. "That's where we finally grew up," he said. "I don't understand," the young being said. "You just left? Why was that so hard?" The human smiled. "Because everyone else believed the table was the universe. We just remembered it was a piece of furniture. The hard part wasn't